As others fled in fear, the human remained to stand between danger, and as the day grew darker, the skies above the city of New Dawn were filled with the sound of distant rumblings. From the top of the city's tallest tower, Captain Marcus Grant watched as the alien fleet descended like a swarm of locusts. His gaze was steady, his expression hard as steel. He had seen this moment coming for years, and now it was finally here. The galaxy had fallen, and Earth was the last hope. In the command center, his officers were frantically working, trying to organize a last-minute defense. But Marcus knew it was futile. The aliens, known as the Zorath, were unstoppable. Their ships, made of dark metal and strange, glowing energy, outclassed anything humanity had ever built. The Zorath had already taken most of the galaxy, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Earth was the final prize, and Marcus wasn't sure if anyone would survive. Yet in his heart he refused to believe that surrender was an option. "Captain, we need to fall back," shouted Lieutenant Carter, his voice filled with panic. "The enemy is already landing troops." Marcus turned slowly, meeting Carter's eyes. "We stand our ground," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos in the room. "We can't just run, not now, not when the whole galaxy is watching." The other officers exchanged worried glances. They were afraid, and rightfully so. No one had expected the Zorath to come this quickly, and now the humans were caught in a trap. Their best weapons were still on the way, their best soldiers scattered across the planet, and their last line of defense was a handful of soldiers and a few war machines. Marcus knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched, but his resolve remained unshaken. The last human fleet had been destroyed in space, leaving Earth vulnerable. The Zorath were relentless, and they would not stop until every living thing was wiped from the planet. But Marcus wasn't about to let that happen, not while there was still breath in his body. "Get the civilians underground," Marcus ordered, "and make sure the scientists are working on that last device. We might be out of options, but if we can disrupt their systems, we might stand a chance." He didn't know if it would work. He didn't know if anything would work. But as the sounds of explosions grew louder, and the shadows of the Zorath ships loomed ever closer, he knew that he had no choice but to fight. The city was already being torn apart. Buildings that once stood tall and proud were now crumbling under the weight of alien weaponry. Marcus had heard the reports. Entire cities were falling in minutes. The Zorath used weapons that tore through steel and stone as if they were nothing more than paper. But there was something else, something that drove Marcus to stay when others had fled. He couldn't explain it, but deep down, he knew he had to hold his position. Earth had endured so much, and now it was his duty to make sure it wasn't lost so easily. He reached for his helmet and strapped it on, the weight of it a reminder of what was at stake. The human race, struggling to survive against a superior force, needed a symbol. They needed someone to remind them that even in the darkest moments, hope could still shine through. Marcus wasn't just a soldier. He was a symbol of resistance. A symbol of humanity's refusal to bow down to any threat, no matter how powerful. Outside, the sound of marching boots filled the air as Marcus led his team of soldiers to the city's central square. The streets were eerily quiet now, as most of the population had already evacuated. The few civilians who remained were taking shelter wherever they could find it, but Marcus didn't have time to think about them. His priority was the defense. The Zorath were advancing, their soldiers, hulking biomechanical creatures marching in formation. They were terrifying to look at with their dark, armored bodies and cold, unfeeling eyes. But what terrified Marcus the most was how fast they moved, how relentless they were. They didn't stop, they didn't show mercy. They simply advanced, destroying everything in their path. But Marcus wouldn't let them win. Not today. He set up his team at the base of a ruined skyscraper, their weapons raised, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the enemy. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. If they failed here, Earth would fall. But Marcus didn't believe in failure. Not yet. As the first wave of Zorath soldiers emerged from the shadows, Marcus didn't hesitate. He barked orders to his team, each member moving with precision, ready to do whatever it took to stop the invaders. It wasn't enough. They were outnumbered, and the Zorath's weapons tore through the human defenses like paper, but Marcus refused to back down. He fired his rifle, cutting down two of the alien soldiers in quick succession. His team followed suit, their guns roaring as they fought with everything they had. But it wasn't enough. The aliens kept coming. No matter how many they killed, there were always more. "Fall back," one of his soldiers shouted, but Marcus shook his head. "No retreat," he said. "We fight until we can't fight anymore." He kept firing, his heart racing. Every moment, every shot, he felt like he was running out of time. The Zorath were relentless. But there was something about the way they fought that made Marcus believe they were not as unstoppable as they appeared. There had to be a way to stop them. As the last of the human soldiers fell back to the city's underground tunnels, Marcus stood firm, watching the alien soldiers approach. He wasn't going to let Earth fall without a fight, not while there was still a chance. He would stand here, alone if necessary, and fight for humanity's future. The Zorath came closer, their weapons raised, but Marcus didn't flinch. He was the last human standing, and he would fight until his last breath. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The sun had barely risen when Marcus stood at the city's outer wall, watching the alien warships descend in perfect formation. Their dark shapes blotted out the sky, their engines humming with a deep, unsettling rhythm. Marcus' heart beat in sync with the distant noise, the tension hanging thick in the air. His soldiers were spread out behind him, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on the sky, waiting for the inevitable. The first wave was coming. "Captain, we're ready," Lieutenant Carter said, his voice steady but tired. It was the kind of tired that came from sleepless nights spent planning for an invasion that seemed impossible to stop. They had tried everything. They had built weapons, set traps, and fortified the city's defenses, but nothing would stop the Zorath from taking Earth. "We won't stop them," Marcus replied quietly, looking over his shoulder at his team. He saw fear in their eyes. Fear that they might not survive, fear that they were about to lose everything. But he saw something else, too. A fire deep in their hearts. The same fire that kept him standing, even when all seemed lost. They weren't just going to lie down and die. They were going to fight, no matter how hopeless it seemed. He turned back to face the horizon. The alien fleet was getting closer. There was no time left to waste. He had to act. The first Zorath dropships hit the ground with a deafening crash, sending shockwaves through the ground. The humans scrambled, rushing to their positions. The city's defenses, once proud and formidable, now seemed like little more than a joke against the alien onslaught. Marcus felt his blood boil with anger. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. "Positions now," he barked, moving swiftly to the front of his soldiers. He could feel the weight of his rifle against his chest, the familiar cold metal grounding him. This wasn't the first battle he'd fought, but it was the most important one. He took a deep breath. His soldiers were with him, and as long as they stood together, there was hope. He wasn't going to let them down, not when they were depending on him. The first wave of Zorath soldiers emerged from the dropships. They were massive, their dark, mechanical bodies moving with terrifying precision. Their armor gleamed with a sinister, metallic sheen as they marched forward. Each of them seemed to radiate an aura of unshakable confidence, a deadly certainty that they were the superior force. They were the predators. Humanity in their eyes were the prey. "Fire!" Marcus shouted, and the air erupted with the sounds of gunfire. His soldiers fired their weapons, but the bullets bounced off the alien armor like raindrops hitting a wall. The Zorath didn't even flinch. They kept advancing, their weapons charging up with deadly energy. Marcus cursed under his breath. It wasn't enough. They needed more. He turned to Carter. "Deploy the EMP devices. Now." Carter nodded and ran to a nearby crate, pulling out the last of the electromagnetic pulse devices they had salvaged from the old war machines. It was their last hope. If they could disable the Zorath's weapons or communication systems, they might be able to slow them down. But Marcus knew it was a long shot. The Zorath were too powerful, too advanced. But they had to try. The EMPs went off in quick succession, sending bursts of energy through the air. For a brief moment, the Zorath soldiers halted. A few of them stumbled, their weapons flickering and dying. Marcus seized the opportunity, raising his rifle and firing at the exposed aliens. One by one, the Zorath soldiers fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground. But the victory was short-lived. The Zorath adapted quickly. Their soldiers regained control, their weapons powering back up with a crackle of energy. They began to fire back, their energy blasts ripping through the human defenses like a hot knife through butter. The ground shook with every blast. Marcus could hear his soldiers shouting, calling for cover, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of the alien fire. "Get inside," Marcus shouted, pushing forward with a few of his men. He wasn't going to retreat, not yet. But the fight was slipping away from them fast. They moved into a nearby building, a high-rise that had once been a symbol of humanity's achievements. Now it was just another hollow structure, a place to hide for a few more minutes. As the humans took cover inside, Marcus ran up the stairs to the rooftop. From there, he could see the full scale of the invasion. The Zorath had already taken control of several key districts, and their forces were growing. Thousands of soldiers marched through the streets, with tanks and war machines following behind them. The sky was filled with their ships, their engines glowing with an eerie blue light. And yet Marcus didn't feel defeated. In the pit of his stomach, something else stirred. There was still a chance. A tiny chance that he could turn this around. He couldn't explain it, but the thought of surrender, of giving up, was far worse than facing the Zorath head-on. He checked his rifle and adjusted his helmet. Then he turned back to Carter, who had joined him on the rooftop. "Do we fall back?" Carter asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "No," Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on the enemy. "We fight. We make them pay for every inch of earth they take. This isn't over, not while we're still standing." Carter nodded, his face set with determination. The other soldiers gathered around them, ready to fight, ready to die if it came to that. They knew the odds, but they also knew that they couldn't let Earth fall without a fight. The battle raged on, with both sides clashing in the streets below. The Zorath had numbers, but the humans had something more. They had heart. The tide of war was turning, slowly but surely. And Marcus, standing among his comrades, knew that as long as they didn't give up, as long as they kept fighting, they would find a way to survive. The human spirit, he believed, could not be crushed so easily. The sound of gunfire echoed in the streets, reverberating off the broken buildings. Marcus stood at the front of his team, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Zorath had taken control of half the city in just a few hours, but Marcus was not ready to give up. Earth was their home, and he would die before he let it fall without a fight. His team, a group of soldiers and civilians, were gathered in the ruins of an old government building. It was one of the last strongholds left in the city, a place where they could regroup and prepare for the next phase of the battle. But even here, the feeling of defeat was in the air. The walls were cracked and the ceiling had caved in several places. The floor was littered with debris and the smell of smoke and dust filled the room. Marcus could see it in their eyes, the fear, the exhaustion, the hopelessness. He knew they were all wondering the same thing. How much longer could they hold out? How long before the Zorath came knocking on their door? But Marcus wasn't about to let that fear take hold. He couldn't, not when the fate of Earth rested on his shoulders. "Listen up," Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the room. "We're not done yet. The Zorath might think they've won, but we still have a chance. They've got more soldiers, more firepower, but we have something they'll never have. We have the will to fight. We have the spirit of humanity on our side." He looked around at his team, locking eyes with each person in turn. There were soldiers, engineers, and scientists among them, people who had never fought before, but who were now ready to stand with him. The fear was still there, but so was the determination. "We've got one last shot at this," Marcus continued. "There's a device, a weapon. We don't know if it'll work, but it's our best chance. If we can get it operational, we might be able to disrupt their systems. We might be able to slow them down, give us a fighting chance." He didn't know if the weapon would work. The device had been found in the ruins of an old military base, a relic from the days before the Zorath came to Earth. It was a prototype, never fully tested, and no one knew exactly what it could do. But if it could disable the Zorath's command systems, it might give the humans an edge. "We don't have much time," Marcus said, his voice growing more serious. "If we don't act fast, we'll lose this city, we'll lose Earth, but if we fight, if we push back with everything we've got, we can still win." The room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the soldiers, a young woman named Sarah, spoke up. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. "I'll help get the device up and running." The others nodded one by one. They were all in. The fear was still there, but it was no longer the only thing they felt. There was something else now, a sense of purpose, a reason to fight. Marcus gave a nod of approval. "Good. Let's move out." The team quickly gathered their gear and prepared to head out. Marcus led them through the ruined streets, his rifle held firmly in his hands. The Zorath were still everywhere, their war machines patrolling the area, but Marcus wasn't afraid, not anymore. He had seen what the Zorath could do, but he had also seen what humans were capable of when pushed to the brink. They moved quickly, staying low and keeping to the shadows. Marcus had been in many battles before, but this was different. Every step, every movement was a risk. The Zorath were everywhere, and any mistake could mean death. But they couldn't afford to hesitate. They couldn't afford to wait. After what felt like hours, they finally arrived at the location of the device. It was hidden in a small, abandoned building at the edge of the city. The walls were lined with old computers and equipment, most of it long outdated. But in the center of the room was the device. It was small, no larger than a suitcase, but it hummed with a strange energy. "This is it," Marcus said, kneeling beside the device. "We don't know how it works, but we're going to figure it out." Sarah and the engineers quickly got to work, hooking up wires and tapping into the old systems. Marcus stood guard, his eyes constantly scanning the perimeter. He could hear the sounds of distant explosions, the roar of Zorath machines in the streets. The city was falling apart, but they were still here. They were still fighting. Minutes passed, then hours. The engineers worked tirelessly, but the device didn't seem to respond. Marcus' heart pounded in his chest as he looked around the room. Time was running out. "Come on," he muttered to himself. "Come on, work." Finally, one of the engineers, a man named Jacob, looked up from the device. "It's working," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "We've got a connection. It's activating." Marcus' heart skipped a beat. Could it really be that simple? Could this small piece of technology be their salvation? The device hummed louder, the energy inside it growing stronger. Then, with a loud crackle, it sent a shockwave through the building. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment, everything went dark. When the lights came back on, Marcus felt a strange shift in the air. The Zorath, who had been patrolling the area, stopped in their tracks. Their movements became erratic. Their communication systems went silent. The war machines that had been marching through the streets stopped dead. "It worked," Marcus said, his voice filled with disbelief. "It really worked." The device had disrupted the Zorath systems. For the first time since the invasion began, they were vulnerable. They weren't invincible. They could be stopped. Marcus turned to his team, his face grim but determined. "This is our chance," he said. "We fight now. We take the city back." They moved out immediately, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they had a fighting chance. The Zorath might have the numbers, but humanity had the heart. And that, Marcus knew, was something the Zorath would never understand. The sun had set, and the city was bathed in the eerie glow of distant explosions. The air was thick with smoke, and the sounds of battle echoed from every direction. But for the first time since the invasion began, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long while: hope. The Zorath were no longer unstoppable. They had been dealt a blow, and now humanity had a chance to push back. As Marcus and his team moved through the streets, the devastation was impossible to ignore. The once proud city of New Dawn was now a broken shell of its former self. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and the streets were littered with debris. But despite the destruction, there was a sense of determination in the air. The humans had been pushed to the edge, but they were not ready to fall. Not yet. The first wave of Zorath forces had been disrupted by the device, but there were still countless more out there, patrolling the city. Their war machines were huge, towering over the humans with their cold, metallic bodies. But now the advantage was on their side. The Zorath were vulnerable, and Marcus knew this was their moment. He led the way, his rifle held firmly in his hands. The soldiers followed him closely, their expressions focused, their bodies tense. The engineers and civilians had retreated to safety, leaving the fighting to those who had trained for it. Marcus glanced over his shoulder at his team, his eyes meeting Carter's. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked, his voice steady. Carter nodded, his face determined. "We're ready, Captain." They moved swiftly through the city, using the shadows to their advantage. The Zorath soldiers patrolled the streets, unaware of the human resistance that was closing in. Marcus' plan was simple: strike fast, hit them hard, and then disappear back into the city before they could retaliate. The Zorath might have the firepower, but they didn't have the same level of coordination that humans did. They couldn't think on their feet the way the humans could. They reached their first target, a group of Zorath soldiers stationed outside a damaged building. The soldiers were scanning the area, their weapons held at the ready. They were focused, but Marcus knew they wouldn't be prepared for what was about to hit them. "Now," Marcus whispered. The team opened fire, their weapons roaring to life as they cut down the Zorath soldiers with deadly precision. The aliens barely had time to react before they were knocked to the ground, their bodies crumpling beneath the onslaught of human fire. It was a quick, clean victory, But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. They had to keep moving, keep striking, until the Zorath were pushed back for good. They continued their assault, taking down more and more Zorath soldiers as they moved deeper into the city. The sound of gunfire filled the air, and for a brief moment the humans felt like they were in control. But Marcus knew that they couldn't afford to get complacent. The Zorath would adapt. They always did. "Keep moving," Marcus shouted as they pushed forward. "We need to keep them on their toes. Don't give them a chance to regroup." The team moved through the city, taking out enemy patrols and sabotaging any Zorath war machines they encountered. They worked like a well-oiled machine, each member of the team playing their part. The soldiers fought with precision, the engineers hacked into enemy systems to disable their weapons, and the civilians helped transport supplies and wounded soldiers to safety. But as the night wore on, the Zorath began to respond. The hum of their war machines grew louder, and their soldiers became more alert. It was clear that they were starting to realize that something was wrong. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were fighting back. "Reinforcements are coming," Carter said, his voice tense. "We need to hurry." Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could see the Zorath reinforcements moving into the city, their ships descending from the sky like dark vultures. They were bringing in more soldiers, more war machines. The battle was about to get a lot harder. "We have to take the central plaza," Marcus said, pointing ahead. "That's where they're coordinating their forces. If we take it, we can disrupt their command structure. We can break their hold on the city." The team moved toward the plaza, pushing forward with everything they had. They encountered more Zorath soldiers along the way, but they didn't slow down. The humans were focused, driven by the knowledge that this was their one chance. They had to make it count. As they reached the plaza, Marcus saw the Zorath Central Command Center in the distance. It was a massive structure, towering over the rest of the city. The air around it crackled with energy, and Marcus could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. This was it. If they could take this building, they would have a real chance of winning. But the plaza was heavily guarded. There were dozens of Zorath soldiers, and their war machines were positioned around the building, ready to defend it at all costs. Marcus knew they couldn't just rush in. They needed a plan. "We'll split into two groups," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "Group 1 will create a distraction on the left side of the plaza. Group 2 will move in from the right and take the building. We'll hit them fast and hard. No hesitation. Understood?" The team nodded, their faces set with determination. They had trained for moments like this, and now it was time to put that training to the test. The distraction team moved into position first, drawing the attention of the Zorath soldiers on the left side of the plaza. They opened fire, drawing the Zorath's attention and forcing them to focus on the false threat. Meanwhile, the second group, including Marcus, moved in from the right side, staying low and using the cover of the ruined buildings to hide their approach. The Zorath were caught off guard. They had expected one front, but the humans had attacked from two sides. The element of surprise was on their side. They fought their way into the command center, taking down enemy soldiers as they went. The Zorath were fierce, but the humans were faster, more adaptable. Marcus' heart raced as they pushed deeper into the building, the sound of gunfire ringing in his ears. Finally, they reached the central control room. The Zorath soldiers inside were already preparing for a counterattack, but it was too late. Marcus and his team burst in, guns blazing, and within moments the room was secure. The humans had won. "We did it," Carter said, breathing heavily. "We actually did it." Marcus stood in the center of the room, looking around at his team. They were bruised, tired, but they had done the impossible. They had struck a major blow against the Zorath, but this was only the beginning. The war was far from over. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in months, Marcus allowed himself to smile. They had taken the first step toward reclaiming Earth. "Let's get ready," Marcus said, his voice calm but full of purpose. "The fight isn't over. We keep pushing, we keep fighting. We show them what humanity is made of." And with that, the humans stood tall, ready to continue their battle for Earth. They had shown the Zorath that they weren't done yet. And they wouldn't stop until Earth was free. The early morning light was dim, casting long shadows across the ruined city. Marcus stood on the rooftop of the command center, looking out at the battlefield below. The sounds of battle were fading now, replaced by the distant whirring of alien war machines and the crackling of radio static. The Zorath forces had retreated for the moment, but Marcus knew it was only temporary. They would be back. They always came back. But this time, something was different. They had made a dent in the enemy's defenses. They had shown the invaders that humanity could still fight. He glanced at his team, standing behind him. They were tired, their faces dirty and scarred, but their eyes were filled with something they hadn't had for a long time: hope. The battle wasn't over, but they had won a significant victory. It wasn't enough to end the war, but it was a start. "Captain," Carter said, walking up beside him, "the team is ready to move out. We've secured the area, but we need to start planning the next step." Marcus nodded. He had been thinking about it all night. The victory in the plaza had given them a foothold, but the Zorath weren't going to back down. They would regroup, they would adapt, and they would come at them with everything they had. The humans couldn't afford to stop now. They needed to keep pushing, keep fighting. But there was something else, something Marcus couldn't ignore, the fear that still lingered. "I know," Marcus said, his voice low. "But we need to think carefully. We've hit them hard, but they're still out there. They're still more powerful than we are." "We can take them, Captain," Carter said firmly. "We've got the advantage now. We've disrupted their command, and we've got the momentum. If we push hard enough, we can drive them out of this city." Marcus turned to face his lieutenant, his expression serious. "It's not just about taking the city. It's about taking Earth back. And to do that, we need to think bigger. We need to hit them where it hurts." Carter hesitated. "What do you have in mind?" "We go for their supply lines," Marcus said, his eyes narrowing as he thought it through. "Their war machines depend on constant resupply. If we can cut that off, we cripple their ability to continue the fight. We hit them fast, we hit them hard, and we don't stop until they're on the defensive." It was a risky plan, but Marcus had seen what the Zorath could do when they had all their resources. If they allowed the invaders to resupply, it would only be a matter of time before the tide turned back in the aliens' favor. They couldn't afford to let that happen. "We'll need a team to infiltrate their supply depot," Marcus continued. "It's going to be dangerous. We'll have to move quickly before they realize what's happening." Carter nodded, understanding the gravity of the mission. "I'll assemble a team. We'll get it done, Captain." Marcus turned to the rest of the soldiers, gathering them in a tight group. "Listen up," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "We've fought the Zorath on their terms for far too long, but now it's our turn. We know this city. We know how to move in the shadows. We know how to take what's ours." He paused, letting his words sink in. The soldiers were tense, ready for the next phase of the fight, but Marcus knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. They had already lost so much, and the price of victory would be steep. "But remember this," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This isn't just about us. This is for everyone who's counting on us. This is for Earth, and we're not going to let it fall, not now, not ever." A murmur of agreement ran through the group. The soldiers were ready, more determined than ever to finish what they had started. The mission was set in motion immediately. They gathered their weapons, checked their equipment, and prepared for the journey ahead. Marcus felt a sense of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. The people he had fought beside, his comrades, were looking to him for leadership. He couldn't afford to let them down. They moved out under the cover of darkness, sticking to the back alleys and narrow streets. The city was still dangerous, but the Zorath were scattered, recovering from the previous night's battle. Marcus led the way, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, ready for anything. His heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve was unwavering. They reached the Zorath supply depot by the early hours of the morning. It was heavily guarded, surrounded by Zorath soldiers and automated defense systems. But Marcus and his team had a plan. They had studied the enemy, and they knew where the weak spots were. "On my mark," Marcus whispered, crouching low behind a pile of rubble. "We move in fast and we disable their defenses. Once we're inside, we take out their power source." Carter, his face grim, gave a quick nod. "Understood, Captain." With a final glance at the team, Marcus gave the signal. They moved quickly, darting from cover to cover as they approached the supply depot. The guards were unaware, their focus on the distant horizon. Marcus could feel the tension in the air. One wrong move and everything would fall apart. They reached the outer perimeter of the depot where the first wave of defenses stood. A set of automated turrets scanned the area, their sensors sweeping back and forth. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled a small device from his pack and activated it, sending out a pulse that temporarily disabled the turrets. They dropped to the ground, motionless. "Go!" Marcus ordered. The team rushed forward, guns raised, as they breached the outer gates of the depot. The Zorath soldiers inside were caught off guard. They scrambled for their weapons, but it was too late. The humans were already inside, cutting down the alien forces with brutal efficiency. Marcus and his team made their way to the central control room, where the main power source for the depot was located. They encountered resistance along the way, but it was nothing they couldn't handle. The Zorath had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Finally, they reached the power core. It was a massive machine glowing with unnatural energy. Marcus glanced at the device, then back at his team. "We're running out of time," he said. "Let's take this thing down." With a few quick commands, the engineers set to work, planting explosives on the core. The countdown began, and Marcus felt a rush of adrenaline. They had done it. They had taken the supply depot. The explosion shook the ground beneath them, a deafening roar that echoed through the streets. The power in the depot flickered and went dark. The Zorath's resupply line had been severed. They were crippled, at least for now. Marcus and his team made their way back to the city, moving quickly to avoid any further contact with the enemy. As they reached the safety of their hideout, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. They had won another battle. The Zorath might be stronger, but humanity was determined to fight. And with each victory, they were getting closer to taking Earth back. But Marcus knew this war was far from over. There was still much to be done. The Zorath were relentless, and they would not stop until Earth was theirs. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He had seen the strength of the human spirit, and he knew that no matter what happened, they would never stop fighting. Not now, not ever.